Hello and welcome to another edition of Graham Hughes' PUBCAST, a virtual PUBCAST, as I'm in a virtual pub. And today I'm joined by Madeleina Kay, famous pro-EU campaigner, and Drew Galdron, our very own Faux Bojo. And apparently, according to...
I've been in an ICU, old boy.
According to Nadine Dorras, you should have been out of action for 3 months, but you're only out of action for 3 weeks. And everyone's now going, hang on, is she saying that he didn't really have it? Not for me to say. Not for me to say.
Well, you know,
we should ask the Prime Minister himself.
It's very strange the fact that his popularity hasn't declined a lot during this debacle. The UK is 0.8% of the world's population, but somehow 10% of all COVID-19 deaths, and that's just the ones in hospitals. But that's not why I gathered you here today. I want to talk today because we kind of did all the ways the government have messed up to death the other day with Cozy and Ben. What I want to talk about is some of the positives of what's happened. I know it's awful, and I know people are dying, and the NHS is stretched, and doctors and nurses are getting ill, and loads of businesses are closing down, loads of people have been made unemployed. What silver linings are there to this absolute debacle that's gone on in this country because the government doesn't know its arse from its elbow?
Well, I have to say, a lot of the Brexit trolling has died down. It really hit a peak just after Boris Johnson became Prime Minister back last summer, and literally, like myself and other anti-Brexit activists were just like getting insane levels of trolling, and I think that may very well have been because somebody was funding these bot accounts on Twitter. Anyway, that kind of sustained until January when Brexit happened, etc. But for sure, with kind of coronavirus creeping up on us, it's like the whole Brexit conversation, even when you like turn on the news, it's gone. Nobody's talking about it, and I don't know. I think people were sick to death of hearing about Brexit all the time, and for sure the trolling was hideous, and that's gone. And I have to say, my life has improved like 1,000,000% for the fact that I'm not being trolled on a daily basis.
Well, you received trolling not just from the Leavers, but from a lot of people in the Remain community who kept going on at you that you weren't doing it right. And I got this as well, but nowhere near it to the extent that you got it.
Armchair activists, everyone's a critic. It takes a lot more balls to go out and actually do something about, anything. And I don't know, like, it completely undermined our own movement. And I just... we collapsed because of all the infighting. And right now I am still campaigning, doing pro-EU campaigning, but I'm cooperating with movements in Europe, which are ongoing, existing, because I just feel like it's a bit of a lost cause in the UK at the moment.
Well, as soon as the election was announced, I was putting out there that this is where the Rejoin campaign's going to have to start, because it was like game over. That was it, foregone conclusion.
Rejoin is never going to make any progress as long as the Remain movement are more focused on fighting amongst themselves.
Yeah. Well, the same with Labour. Labour are never going to get anywhere until they stop fighting amongst themselves, and they haven't. And this is very frustrating that even now that Corbyn's out, Starmer's in, and yet the infighting is still going on. And this leak of this it was like a dossier involving people's private emails, text messages, WhatsApp messages that have been mined for some kind of derogatory comments about the leadership. And this was given to the Labour lawyers, and the Labour lawyers looked at it and went, we can't give this to anyone, it's got people's names in it, there's nothing redacted. And so you got to give it to the your Equalities and Human Rights Commission, you got to give it to them. And like, no, this is not a legal document, this what is wrong with you people? We can't give them this. Because basically it's saying, well, we would have done more about anti-Semitism, but everyone's being really mean about Jeremy, so we didn't. And it's like, okay, I was even thinking that was going to be a good idea going through someone's head, but obviously it was. And as soon as it was kicked back by the Labour lawyers, it got leaked with nothing redacted. And we live in a world now where this sort of stuff can come out. It could potentially bankrupt Labour because of the lawsuits it's looking at for the people who are named in it. But also, where's the Russia report? Where's the public inquiry into the Brexit referendum? Where's the public inquiry into Russian interference? Where's the public inquiry into Covid-19 and the government's cack-handed handling of it? Ugh.
To be honest with you, it's no wonder that the confidence of the public in the Tory government hasn't declined at all, because what's the alternative, you know, if the opposition are as they are?
Sadly, that is the answer of just anyone that you try and make an anti-Tory point to, really.
What's the opposition?
One of the things people say is, oh, would Corbyn have done things any differently? And I'm like, well, I don't think that's a very good argument, because it's what's happening now. And you're trying to deflect the terrible job the government's done by going, yeah, but what if Krusty the Clown was in charge? I'm like, that's not the issue here. The issue is we have doctors and nurses who don't have enough personal protective equipment. We don't have enough COVID-19 tests. We didn't lock down early enough. We weren't thorough enough in our screenings at our borders. We didn't close our borders. Our borders are still open, as far as I'm aware. People are still coming into the country and not being tested for even their temperature. And that's weird to me, because when I was traveling back in 2009, I was traveling through West Africa, and a few points, especially I particularly remember going into Sierra Leone from Guinea. And I had to go through a temperature scanner because swine flu had taken hold in 2009. That was going around the world. Obviously, it wasn't as bad as what we're facing now, but people were concerned about it. So even in sort of developing nations, these really, really impoverished nations in West Africa, they had the technology to test people's bloody temperature on the way into the country. It's like, why aren't we doing that?
Yeah, they were, they were scanning. They were scanning me and any other passengers on our way out of Hong Kong in February. So why we aren't doing it with people coming into the country?
And the whole Brexit thing was about our borders. Control our borders.
Oh God.
Yeah.
The other thing that's really pissing me off at the moment is, the lack of kind of strong public messaging, kind of like enforcing the social distancing, so that it actually hammers it into people's heads, and then actually enforcing it, policing it on the streets. Because every time I go out now, it's like a hazard. Like, there's so many people just like walking into you, runners like overtaking you but like not at a safe distance, in the shops, people just not respecting the 2 meter distance, kids who clearly haven't been, like the other day I was waiting in the queue outside the shop and some little boy literally like ran his scooter into me and then just stood like right next to me, and his dad comes over and just says, oh, you need to stand a bit further away from people, love. And then the kid just looked at him, didn't move, like complete bafflement on his face, that he didn't understand why he was being told to move away from me. And then the dad didn't do anything to actually move him. And I was like, and it's, everyone like I've spoken to is saying the same things. The people in the UK like just do not understand the social distancing measures at all. They're not respecting them. It's not being enforced by the government, who don't want a nanny state. And as a result, our transmission rate is going to remain ridiculous, and we're going to remain in lockdown for a lot longer.
I am finding the experience different here in southwest London. People are a lot more attentive to the guidelines. They are generally keeping their distance. I haven't had many instances like Maddie has had, but that I guess that is likely to be an isolated case for where I am, or maybe much of London is an isolated case like that.
Well, no, 'cause I've got a friend. He won News Photographer of the Year. He's called Tolga Akman. I follow him on Instagram, and like I saw some photos that he'd shot in East London, and it was like insane. Just people out sunbathing, clustered around shopping areas, sitting on the floor together at pavements. Like just.
I'm only laughing because I'm kind of feeling glad I'm no longer living around that.
Yeah, it was like social distancing East London style. It's like.
Isn't that a consequence of a failure of leadership? That this is, the people are going, what do we do? And the government, and Boris Johnson has to take a huge amount of blame for this. Up until nearly the end of March, he was still bumbling around going, oh, I've been shaking people's hands, no problem,
Exactly.
I like shaking people's hands. And we had that massive stereophonic in Cardiff, and we had Cheltenham. Is it Cheltenham, the races? And you look at it going, what the hell? Why is this?
To be honest, even if he were suddenly being much more sincere about the whole thing, and more insistent of how strict people have to be, who would trust him anyway? Who would trust such a compulsive liar?
Yeah, I mean, the government's always avoided these kind of controlling measures because they call it the nanny state and whatever, but like I think the Elysee in France described it as benign neglect, the government, our government's policy, because what's going to happen? More people are going to die. Yeah. And I genuinely think that it's not out of malice, it's just out of lack of information, lack of assertive government. Like my next door neighbor, came up to me because we've got this situation where I have to walk down an alleyway and have to walk through their garden to get back to my house. I have to go through their garden, and she came out and she gave me this bag of dog food that they didn't want, but clearly it's not in her head about the 2 meter distance. And it's not, it's not out of any kind of malice, it's just about lack of public information and assertive instructions. Like if you listen to what's the Jacinda, the New Zealand Prime Minister,
Jacinda Ardern,
that's it. When you listen to her broadcasts, they're really they're coming from a place of compassion, but also from authoritative and kind of strict almost leadership, like saying we're doing these things, this is why, and it's for your own good. We've just not had any of that.
And that's why we've had 25,000 deaths. That's not the ones in the hospitals. So that's just the ones in the hospitals. And New Zealand has had 19. 19,000, just 19.
19,
And they're easing the lockdown over there because they can.
Exactly. Well, the irony of them delaying the lockdown, allowing Cheltenham races, whatever, because they didn't want to stifle the UK economy. Ultimately, we are going to have far more economic damage as a result of their failure of leadership and their failure to act.
Yeah. But we were supposed to be talking about the good things.
We're supposed to be focusing on the positive.
Short-term decisions causing long-term damage. Who would have thought that could happen under a Tory government?
Yeah.
But this
positives, Graham. Go on. What are your positives?
This in a way is a horrible trial run for global warming. Except there's going to be no vaccine in a year's time for global warming. If we get to tipping point after tipping point, there's no going back, and the world will be a very, very different place, and a lot of people are going to die, and the economies of the world are going to collapse, and there's going to be refugees everywhere. In fact, if the
50 billion wasn't the UN predicting?
if the water level rises by what it would if both the caps melt and Greenland melts and all of the glaciers melt around the world, which is looking likely, that's 80 meters the sea level will go up. It might go up even more than that because the sea will be hotter because it'll get more sun because there's no white bits on either end of the earth reflecting the sunlight. So the water expands. Might be even a bit more than that. But if it gets up to 80 meters, then Scotland's going to be a lot bigger than England because England's just going to be a load of islands. No, that's it. London's gone. New York's gone. Singapore's gone. Hong Kong's gone. That's it. I mean, they're solidly underwater. Rome, Paris, underwater. You would have to take a boat to visit the Eiffel Tower. You'll have to take a boat to visit the Colosseum. And we know this is going to happen, just like we knew about COVID-19 back in January. We know what the consequences are going to be, just like we know what the consequences of COVID-19 are going to be. And yet we're doing the absolute bare bloody minimum about stopping climate change in the same way that, until it was too late. And then it cost more lives and it was a bigger economic hit than actually doing something about it in the first place.
I do think that this situation, the lockdown measures, can be seen as a trial run for the kind of measures that are going to need to be taken in order to save the planet, to deal with climate change. And I think that is that is one benefit of the situation that we're in, that people are realizing that, hey, if there's political will to implement these measures, it can happen. And I also think that the whole situation that we're in is changing people's value systems, okay? Because like normally in society, particularly capitalist consumerist societies, we value our worth as people and our success in life by financial measures, by our jobs and careers and money, and by social status, right? Both of those things have been taken away from us effectively, or frozen. Lots of people lost their jobs, economies are stuck, and we also we can't go out with to show off all the luxury goods that we've bought, or the I heard this radio this interview on Radio 4 where a fashion retail expert was saying that the market for luxury goods has crashed because people have got nowhere to show them off. And that's instead making people focus on what really matters in life. They're re-engaging with family, they're valuing in their health more, and they're also engaging with nature and natural spaces for the people that can leave the houses. They value gardening, those kind of things, the wildlife, so much more than maybe they did before.
To sort of take the well, not to take the wind out of Maddie's sails, but to take a less pleasant spin on it. A nurse friend of mine, I assume actually he probably is doing some COVID-related work, but as I say, his section is usually GUM. He posted saying there's a meme doing the rounds that presumably is meant to in some way counter what's happening and list the positive attributes of the current crisis along the lines of traffic, in capital letters, of course, is gone. Fuel is affordable. Bills extended. Kids are at home with their families, etc. I bloody hate it, he says. Aside from in some way suggesting that the effect of the virus on the health of a few is the only negative, it lists all the positives as if that's somehow a way to bring equilibrium, as if the 20,000 plus deaths in hospitals and the NHS, let alone those in the community in the UK or wider, still globally, were in some way a reasonable cost of all these lovely little positives.
That I don't see it as like a zero-sum game where it's worth sacrificing this many people in order to gain.
Not a choice.
I'm seeing it more like this awful thing has happened, what can we learn from it? How can we change as a result of it?
Oh,
and I think Maddie's
I mean what I'm saying is that's the correct sort of positives. Whereas what my friend is posting about here, you know, this is just sort of cynicism given a positive spin just because you know, in the same fashion as victim blaming, kind of, if you know what I mean. You know, and it's not just jaded; it's incredibly blind as well. You know, fuel is affordable. That's not actually got much to do with the current crisis. That's mostly because OPEC entered a price war on crude oil with Russia because they want to force Russia out of the market as much as possible. Bills extended, but that doesn't mean they're going to get.
You'll have to pay them at some point.
Paid immediately, and then and you know, that doesn't mean poverty disappears overnight. You know, when things eventually go back to normal, poverty is still very much going to exist in this country.
It's going to get worse. There's no running away from the fact that this crisis is going to cause a huge amount of economic damage. And the problem is that we've got a Tory government in charge who are going to, who are probably going to, revert to the austerity measures which they did after the financial crash, which has caused huge levels of inequality. And nurses using food banks, the same nurses that they're giving out badges to and applauding every Thursday night. We are a nation of hypocrites if we applaud the NHS staff whilst voting Tory. Sorry.
I mean, that's ended up having its own introspective spins because you've got some people now thinking that you're clapping them only if you're voting Tory, which obviously isn't the case. It's all deflecting from the main point.
I mean, did you see any of the videos of the people applaud on Westminster Bridge? Like literally emergency services there, and none of them are respecting the social distancing measures. It's just like it's a mind fuck. It really is.
Well, going back to what you said, Maddie, the reason why people are not respecting the 2 metre rule and things like that, it just hasn't been drilled into people. No. People know all about Major Tom walking up and down his garden, but they just don't know what the rules are when it comes to COVID-19. They don't really know why we're doing these things. We had a Prime Minister saying that it was every Briton's inalienable right to go down the pub and then to shut the pubs. I mean, it was just, it's been a very, very confused, not as confused as Trump. That's just planet.
Let's all drink detergent.
No, drink bleach. Inject it into your lungs. That's the way it works. Along with some sunlight, because if you put sunlight,
the virus is gone.
But probably enough, some people have now died as a result of him saying that. Some people died a few weeks ago when he was going on about hydrochloroquine, and he was saying that this was an amazing. It had amazing things. He didn't know what they were, but they were amazing. And a couple in America found that their tank, their fish tank cleaner, had chloroquine in it, and so they ate it and they died. They thought it was going to protect them from COVID-19.
The other thing was him suggesting antivirals, which of course don't work. And then that led to loads of people buying them, stocking up on them. And that meant that people that needed the antivirals to treat HIV or whatever couldn't get hold of them. He's dangerous. He's actually dangerous. He's endangering lives.
They've tied him up, haven't they, and thrown him into the broom closet. For the foreseeable. But the guy's an absolute menace, and he's got blood on his hands. And this week is going to be a landmark in American history, because a grim landmark, the death toll in America is going to go over 58,000, and that figure is significant because that's how many Americans died in the Vietnam War. Meanwhile, in Vietnam itself, the number of deaths from COVID-19 is 0. So you're just like, guys, how can a developing nation like Vietnam, which is attached to China by a land border, manage to just clamp down on this so effectively, so well? If someone in a village is tested positive, the whole village goes into quarantine. They are testing, they are tracing, they're making sure they're following the World Health Organization's procedures. We're not. And when the government say, oh, we're being led by the science.
Isn't like the head chief science officer something, not actually even a scientist, like he's never even published a scientific
not one
paper.
of the chief ones, but I think one of the people who's on the SAGE thing is actually a physicist, not a physician, which would be good, a physicist. And obviously their brother is involved in some kind of vote leave campaign and got paid off by Boris and his boys, and it's all very incestuous, as you can imagine. But the big thing is Dominic Cummings sat in on these SAGE meetings, which is just obscene. This is an unelected bureaucrat who has in the past written in praise of eugenics.
Yep.
I don't want
apparently
to near public health.
No, I mean, apparently his wife as well, a random thing, did Thought for the Day on Radio 4.
Dominic Cummings has a wife?
Yeah, apparently. And she did Thought for the Day. It's
hell.
Like the media are just, particularly the BBC, are in the bloody pockets of the government.
That reminds me of that Valentine's card that says, even Hitler had a girlfriend, you're less desirable than Hitler. Anyway.
What annoys me most about Boris Johnson is the fact that
everything.
It's not even publicly known how many children he has.
Yes.
Like, he has 4 officially known, and there's many others which are not publicly announced. And like, people don't care. It's just like, yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, it's Boris.
Imagine if he was a woman, right? And he had unknown numbers. Like, it's.
I don't necessarily think it's. Well, yeah, I do think there's the gender things comes into it quite a lot.
Eton Boys Club. That's what it is. The Bullingdon Club. Well,
it's not just that. And I'm going to sound awful saying this, but when I was in school, some of my mates were just absolute arses. But the ones who made me laugh, the ones that I thought were funny, I let them get away with a lot more than the ones who didn't. Do you know what I mean? And I think that's why Trump gets away with it. I think that's why Johnson gets away with it, because people just go, oh, they're funny. They make me laugh. I don't care. Just on a bigger scale, obviously.
Yeah. Well, it was like during the election period, I heard this interview with one of the, the Red Wall working class men in the north, and yeah, he said, "Oh yeah, I'm going to vote for Boris Johnson because he's like one of the lads, isn't he?" And I'm like, what planet do miners, sons come from this, one of the, in the gang with the Bullingdon boys? It's just madness.
But that's the way he comes across, isn't it? He's the guy that you would like to go to if you had the choice between him or Jeremy Corbyn, who would you go for a pint with? You'd go with Boris Johnson.
Politics is a game of personality. We live in an era of personality politics. Douglas Adams had it right with Zaphod Beeblebrox. He's not there to make the decisions. He's there to distract from Dominic Cummings, etc., the people making the decisions in the background. He's there as an affable character that's supposed to win the public over with charisma and charm and personality, and that's exactly what he does. And anything that comes out of his mouth, people just shrug it off. He gets away with it. The problem has always been that the opposition, the liberals, the left wing, think that they're somehow above playing the personality politics game. And it's like, oh no, we're going to prize ourselves on rational thought and diplomacy.
Isn't that mad?
We're not going to engage with their tactics.
You're absolutely right. But the left is more pretentious than the right. How crazy is that? Or topsy-turvy world we live in. And that's the falls of the left. They're just just too far up their own arses.
And going back, that goes exactly back to what you were saying at the beginning of this conversation about, you know, them attacking me and you for not doing it right, for not taking it seriously, whatever. You know, we
How
just
dare you have fun? It's very serious, because more people will listen to you if you're very serious. Yeah, right. Come on.
Yeah, you have to be dressed seriously to be taken seriously. Okay, sorry, I'll take my Supergirl costume off then. And put on a black
march in London. Hang on, Maddie, wasn't there like a Remain march in London where they wanted to have a dress code?
Yeah, somber colours. Somber colours. And oh god, I saw a tweet. What was it? Silence is the language of the powerful.
Sorry?
Silence is the language of the silenced. Sorry.
Did they just say silence is the language of the powerful?
Yes. Literally.
No.
That was tweeted. And
oh my lord.
Anybody that knows how the media operates, you have to get their attention with something that's eye-catching, that's iconic, that's recognizable, that communicates a message in a very simple and effective way. Yeah. And then you have to make your point in, you know, a fraction of, the time that you would normally. And you have to be succinct, you have to be punchy, you have to be convincing, you have to be charismatic. You know, that's how to communicate effectively. And, you know, like academics waffling away in their, you know, dressed in their smart clothing and with their, you know, they're lost on the average person.
Yeah. Well, academics, and I'm not saying this is a quote by somebody else, but they're basically students who never left school.
My dad's never going to forgive me if he watches this.
Just saying. But going back to the positives that are hopefully going to come of all this is the fact that we're now seeing that people can change the way they live in a substantial way in terms of not going to work, working from home, and knowing how to do that, using technology like Zoom that we're using at the moment, or Skype and whatever, to have conversations, to have meetings. And that experience that people have gone through, I think there's going to be a lot of people who at the end of this are going to go, I don't actually want to go back to the office. I'm quite happy working from home. I know some people hate it. Some people can't stand it. But there are going to be a number of people who think, yeah, this is great. Which is good for the environment because it means less commuters. It means less people making these small journeys every single day of their lives, which you know, they all add up, obviously.
You know, another thought that I had was that obviously where you've got offices and workspaces, etc., they're taking up buildings, okay? Now, if fewer businesses need to take up a building or take up less building space, that would actually free up more buildings for accommodation, for housing. Yeah. You know, that would be a potential way of tackling the homelessness crisis. I mean, you know, hotels, second home ownership, that these are all things that are luxuries, right? To me, housing is a right. You know, like every person should have housing and it shouldn't be seen as an asset, you know. And I've personally experienced where living in small local rural areas, second home ownership and then renting those homes out to tourists actually can be very destructive to local communities because it prices out residents and it just turns the local economy into a tourist economy. Yeah. And the local people can't afford to live there.
Yeah, that's very true in Cornwall, where people can't afford to live because there's so many people with their second homes there. And it's not just the fact that they're not there all the time. So it means that the pubs, the shops in the local area don't have the amount of custom that they would have if people were living there full time. And yeah, it is. I think it is wrong. I think it's out of order that's the situation. and the government has gone out of its way to make it very, very easy for people with enough money to have a second house.
That's the problem, you see.
People in there.
I don't think we should stop second home ownership altogether or whatever, but it should be heavily taxed.
Yeah,
so
and also, what about the situation at the moment where if you've got money, you buy a second house and you put people in the house who are on benefits, on universal credit or job seekers, and then you take that money off them as rent. Yeah. And that money is then used to pay for the mortgage on your second house. That money is taxpayers' money that people have worked and then had to pay tax on what they've earned, thinking it's going to go to things like the NHS and streetlights and, emptying the bins and things that we actually feel like we should be paying for. But no, it's paying for some rich people's second mortgage. Mortgage on their second house, which is just obscene. And we just see it.
Yeah, I mean, the narrative generally needs to change because, going back to the example of how rural communities are affected by this especially, and many places being turned almost entirely into tourist economies. The narrative is always the narrative has been for years asking what do foreigners contribute, what do immigrants contribute. Of course, what's then led to Brexit is this assumption that they contribute little, if anything, which obviously isn't true. But why then has that narrative not been turned upon? Second homeowners actually questioning what do they contribute.
And going back to the positives of this crisis thing, what has been really nice to see actually is how local communities have pulled together in order to help the most vulnerable residents. I know just from observing an email chain that I'm in from the village that I used to live in with my dad, people that can go out to pharmacies or to the shops to pick up food and deliver them to the elderly and the frail that are self-isolating to protect their health. And the community's really pulling together to support people, and I think that's something that is a positive that can be taken out of this crisis, that actually we're engaging more with the people that are around us and helping those that are in need.
Yeah, and another thing is a lot more people are getting their groceries delivered. Now, there's a certain tipping point with this where, it starts off and it's quite a bad thing that people are getting and then eventually so many people do it. It does become a good thing for the environment, because instead of 20 people going to the supermarket and driving there, filling the cars up with stuff, driving back, you've got one van and that goes to the village and neighborhood, to the area, the suburb, and drops the food off at 20 people's houses. Again, it's pushing that sort of things that we could be doing to improve the environment are being forced on us, not going to work, having to get deliveries, having to basically not make frivolous journeys. And
of course, it would help if such delivery services were as functional as they need to be. And I don't mean just the services being over capacity. I mean, that's reasonably understandable.
Graham, just going back to the climate stuff and the benefits, I read an article in the newspaper about how some European countries are actually using this opportunity to extend bike lanes to lanes that were previously allocated for cars are now for bikes. So this allows more room for social distancing, but also because there's less traffic on the road and there's more cyclists out, and obviously this is encouraging green methods of transport.
Okay, so so just bringing it all together there. I mean, we've got the people cycling, people going out and walking more in the local area. We've got communities coming together. we've got people doing things that are perhaps inadvertently, but they are doing things that are better for the environment. And
less consumerism.
Less consumerism, and people not wasting their money on luxury nonsense.
I think there's been a certain way that generally being given a reasonable break from working has become valued as well.
Not for everyone though. That's definitely not a universal thing.
Oh no, I mean, you've still got your workaholics, but you've also got people who, I suppose, perhaps have felt kind of forced into the workaholic mindset when it doesn't actually do them any good. And they may have actually, in some cases, have come to realise that perhaps not letting their employer crack the whip all the time may actually be better for their health.
Going back to that survey done by an Australian nurse a few years ago, where she was asking people who were terminally ill, like, about their lives and things. And one of the questions he asked them was about regrets. And the number one regret was, I wish I hadn't worked so hard. And that's so true. I mean, there's so many people just go, why am I working my arse off for a house that I never get to spend any time in because I'm working all the time, for kids that I never get to see because I'm working all the time, you know? And then by the time you can retire, it's you know, everything's falling apart pretty much. By the time the governments allow people to retire the way things are going, we're going to be in our 70s, Drew, probably our 80s.
Graham, can I tell you about something? Because like what you just said, I respond to. I'm doing this project at the moment for the Schwarzkopf Foundation. And it involves painting Brexit styles. So people that left the UK because of Brexit and then moved to live in Europe, you know, for cultural reasons.
Yeah.
They're kind of in exile now. And the lady that I've got who's living in Portugal at the moment, this is my painting of her. Her name is, well, she's Lilith on Facebook. But she answered her interview to me, and there was a question about why did you leave, and it was basically because the cost of living in the UK means that there's no kind of like work-life balance. People can't afford to have things that should be a basic human right, like a house and, you know, health and everything. And basically she was saying that other places in Europe, you know, you can actually go and have a good quality of life, and in the UK that's been deprived from everyone, basically because of the Tory government policies that has just furthered inequality and made kind of a decent standard of living impossible for the majority of British people.
Well, what gave me hope is the fact that in a survey that was taken a couple of weeks ago, only 9% of respondents wanted life to go back to exactly the way it was before the lockdown. Only 9%. 91% said no, they don't want to go back to the way things were. And that idea that people on such a huge level, talking about 66 million people overall, can go, yeah, I can deal with this. I can make these steps. I can make these changes in my life because it's making me feel better about how I live and how I interact with my family and my friends, my community. And also it's better for the environment. But that's my hope. So my final question to you both is, do you think it's going to stick?
The lockdown?
No, I mean the mentality that people have built up over the last few weeks, community, the environment, the good things that have actually come from this terrible situation. Do you think any of it's going to stick, or do you think we're just going to go back to business as usual once this is all over?
I still feel a general sense, and you know, okay, it gets played up a lot with, I have to admit, over the scale of people that have been breaking the rules. Perhaps in some way the media have exaggerated it, as they would, but for me, it comes back to, you know, the very same sort of issue that that put the country in the Brexit mess in the first place. That, as far as I see it, English culture is obsessed with fear. And I mean, I suppose, well, one can sort of humour the whole idea that, you know, people stopped being afraid of the virus as soon as it stopped being foreign. But in all seriousness, I do think that that obsession with fear does now, and has done, and perhaps will continue to apply to responsibility. I believe many English people or people subjected to English culture, not all, but many, are inevitably going to be afraid of responsibility, and that is why we won't see a sufficient number of people being responsible for public health, or the environment, or these things which we would hope we're starting to see matter.
Yeah, I have to say I agree largely, and it's mainly informed by my experience of campaigning against Brexit for the last 4 years, is that people don't learn. Evidence and facts and rational argument doesn't make a jot of difference. People are driven by rhetoric, emotion, identity, all of these things, and also by personal interest and laziness. And I think there will be long-term changes as a result of this crisis, but I think they will be driven by economic forces, by things not being able to get back to normal, because it's going to be a long time till they have a vaccine, and there's going to be long-term economic impacts, long-term social distancing measures. As long as they're in force, I think behaviour will be changed. But ultimately, I just don't feel like people are learning, and people's failure to understand why the social distancing measures are necessary and then follow them kind of indicates to me that people just don't get why this is important, why their behavior needs to change. And that goes for coronavirus, that goes for climate change, that goes for Brexit.
Well, I feel like I'm a bit more optimistic, maybe. I feel like, yeah, I understand.
It's been crushed out of me by the last 4 years, Graham. There is no optimism left.
But yeah, no, I'm a bit more optimistic, because I think you're right about what you say about the fact that people just, they listen to the facts that they want to listen to. Do you know what I mean? Facts and opinions. The joke Inside Out, where they go over a crate, and in the crate are facts and opinions, and they say, oh, what are the difference? And they say, oh, everyone gets them mixed up. But I think because this is something a bit different, when we were trying to explain to people why Brexit was a bad idea, it was ephemeral. It was a hypothesis. Do you know what I mean? It was a hypothetical situation to them, and we were like, no, this is what's going to happen. And I knew what was going to happen. I know what's going to happen in terms of, well, trade, for instance, because I've travelled to all these countries around the world and I've seen what it's like at the border when you've got paperwork to fill out, which we didn't have. We won't have if we had stayed in. But this is lived experience, and I think that's different. I think it's different from just trying to give people facts and saying, hey, look at this fact, look at this situation. And because it's a lived experience, I think it will have a lot more impact with more people. So I think you're right, Maddie. I think some people are just away with the fair.
There's such a lack of critical thinking capacities. People just don't join up the dots. There's no joined up thinking. And that's what really, even if people are going through lived experiences, if they're not connecting those to, the knowledge and the information, I'm kind of like, really not optimistic.
I would make one point that some of it is pretend critical thinking. I mean, that's ended up being quite popular amongst the alt-right.
Yeah. Nigel Farage is the king.
They will, you will even get many claiming to strongly endorse critical thinking or skepticism, when actually the views they end up putting across turn out to indicate the complete opposite. Not that I'm thinking of anyone with any Persian names, but what it particularly makes me think of is I can still understand it to a degree. I don't believe that anyone should be going around claiming that 5G is responsible for it or any of that bullshit. But something I put in a post yesterday on my wall, which I will also be repeating on my website, is not just about responsibility, but also trust. And it's not really surprising that people are very much questioning whether they can trust this government or any government, when it's become so common now for such governments in the West to only manufacture trust.
That's true. But we do have other countries to compare the UK against. And so when I say there's only been deaths in New Zealand, people go, oh, but New Zealand's an island. And I'm like, yeah. But it's Iceland. Not from anywhere. And I'm like, well, that's true to an extent, but Vietnam isn't. Vietnam's very much close to where this all started.
You can't do these comparisons, though, if our government is not playing by the same criteria. They're only measuring the deaths in hospital, and then they're comparing those to the deaths in other countries that include all deaths.
Even the deaths in hospitals are sky high. It's 10% of all the deaths. I mean, that's going to give us some ammunition to use against the government, is the fact that we've got something to compare it against. You see, if we were fighting Brexit and we had a country that had left the EU and as a result had turned into a feudal anarchy, we could go, hey, look at that place that turned into a feudal anarchy when it left the EU. Yeah. Something to compare it against. Whereas we never really had that with Brexit. We didn't have it to say that we should stay, and the other country, the other side didn't have it to say, we should leave. It was all based on an ideal, I guess, especially on their side. When it comes to this, we do have actual physical data that everyone's recording around the world into what's happened here. And we have seen time and time again in governments where you have usually always male, populist right-wing people in charge. It's been an absolute massive cock-up, and tens of thousands of people have now died as a result. You look at the UK and the US, and you're just like, people are looking at us around the world in pity. That's great. So that's. I guess I'm just a little bit more optimistic in general. I think that it's got this far, and the fact that people are having to live through it, and there is going to be serious economic, ramifications to all this. But I think if anything, it's going to be long term, very, very long term. It might be the thing that saves the planet. It might be.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
Anyway, guys, so on that note, I would just like to say thank you, Drew. Thank you, Maddie, for coming to my virtual pub and chatting with me. It's been too long. I've missed the pub.
Man of the world.
I missed my inalienable right to go to the pub. Well, thanks for coming along. And just to the viewers at home, just to say, stay home if you can, stay safe. And
Graham, have you told your viewers to support your book?
Not as much as I possibly should.
Okay, right. I'm going to do a pitch for Graham now, because, literally, his book. I'm going to get it. Wait.
I've got a copy over there somewhere. I'll go and get it.
Right, okay. This book, was literally the only book that I read all the way through from start to finish. I couldn't put it down. I was like, this is fascinating. This is amazing. This really entertained me and was filled with so much information and drama and and it actually happened. It's actually a real story. That it's not fiction, it's real. I love this book, and I really hope that Graham can write the second part of it, because it's like being on a cliffhanger and like, I want to know what happened. Graham is an amazing writer. He's very funny. We love this book. We want to see the next one.
Oh, thank you, Maddie. Wow. Proper advert. Oh, it's put a tear to my eye. Okay, thank you very much, guys. I will speak to you again soon, I hope. And in the meantime, please take care of yourselves and each other. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.